Another little story that I'll share with you, and again, all of this is where, just to give you some background, the story of Cain and Abel. Cain being the son of Adam and Eve, and Abel, who was slain by his brother Cain. And I think it's kind of an amusing story. I don't know. When Cain and Abel came before the deity or God, they both brought offerings. And Abel brought, it says, from the best of his, what he was able to till, or rather what he was able to bring, he brought his best offering, his firstling, the first animal to be born that year. And his brother brought some fruit. Cain brought some of the fruit of the ground, or some of the vegetables that he grew. And when he brought the offering to God, the deity accepted the offering of animals, but rejected the offering of vegetables. And it said that this is one of the interpretations, not the only interpretation, but one, that when the vegetables were burned on the altar, they went up like boom, and smoke went up and fell down on Cain, and from that time forward, he was cursed because his skin became black, and everybody knew that he was cursed of God. Now, on the surface, they say, well, these are just, some people, they may just sound like fairy tales, but they actually have influenced people down through the generations into believing that because these things happen, that African American people and all people of color have been cursed as a result of it. When we get to the civil rights era, when Dr. King was practicing, when he was actually leading movements through the South, this is the reason why we could have these problems with people who could sick dogs on children, who could bomb churches and take the lives of innocent people because they actually believed that they were right in trying to defend segregation. And so we see this over and over again, particularly between the 50s, the years between 1954, beginning with Rosa Parks, and even a little before that, up until the time of the death of Dr. King in 1968. Again, where we find racism in religion, it has been prevalent, it remains prevalent in America, and it is maybe surprising to some where we will find it at, because we will find it amongst those who really believe that their religion is better or greater than somebody else's religion. There's a thing called pluralism, wherein there are some people who believe that religion is the same for everybody. There are those who believe that, the Christian faith is the only real religion, that all other religions are fake or phony or should not be practiced at all at any time. And no matter if you're Jewish or if you're Hindu or if you're Buddhist or whatever, that none of those religions should be practiced. Of course, we've experienced that in the United States because we have some people who gave President Barack Obama a lot of problem because they believed he was Muslim. And some still do believe he's Muslim. Well, I don't know why it makes any difference. But he's not, but some believe that he is. And as a result of that, they didn't think he was qualified to be President of the United States. And we see it over and over again amongst people who are not Christian. Even the Bible does teach this. And of course, that salvation or life with God, as I like to call it, belongs to those who have faith in the Christ and only in the Christ. If you don't have a faith in Christ, then you are on your way to a burning hell. I'd like to get people to rethink that and understand that while Christianity is the major religious practice in the United States, this is a big world. And there are people all over the world who practice different faiths. And because they do, I mean, probably, no, I know this for sure, that the majority of people do not practice Christianity. The majority of people may practice Christianity in the United States, but they are not practicing Christianity all over the world in larger numbers than those. We're not the majority. What I want to tell you is we are not the majority. We are probably a lot closer to the minority, but because we have a limited world view, we stick to the idea that Christians are so much better than everybody else. Well, again, I'd like to get you to rethink that. Because I have a problem thinking that God created all these people all over the world for the simple purpose of whacking them. It just seems like just something that ought not happen. That God ought not just come and just say, well, you know what, I'm going to cause all these people to be born, and I'm just going to whack them because they're not Christian. Well, you do understand that Christianity is not the oldest religion, that the Bible is not the oldest book in the world, and God can talk to anybody that He wants to talk to, and He can love everybody that He wants to love. We have a problem with that. I think one of the surprising places where you will find racism, even though I would have a problem in saying that African American people can actually be racist, I think one of the surprising places where you will find racism is in the African American church. Why? Because by and large, African American people resist anything that has to do with pluralism or anything that has to do with a faith that is outside of Christianity. In fact, sometimes they have a problem. They don't even recognize that faith. They don't really understand that Christianity has many denominations. And sometimes people get, if you're not Baptist, if you're not Methodist, you're not Church of God in Christ, or apostolic, then you may be already, ready to burn, ready to toast for hell. So here again is not just one nationality of people hating on another nationality. We have a problem even within the ranks of African Americans where there's hate conversation, I would call it, that goes on against other African Americans and other non-African Americans. So racism and religion is real. I'm having to write. I studied this for a number of years. I worked on having to hold a doctorate of ministry degree from the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, Georgia, which is a part of Morehouse School of Religion is a part of it. And I studied this for a number of years, and it bothered me, it concerned me, that how do we get to this? How do we decide that who is loved by God and who is not loved by God? How do we come to that determination that who should be in the family of God and who should not be in the family of God based upon a particular religion? And I would say this too, that, for the most part, as I've been able to examine, there are not, there are always exceptions to rule, but there are not very many Jewish people that go out hating on people who are Christian. There are not very many Hindu people that go out hating on Christian people just because they are Christian. And yet on the other side of that, we will find Christian people who hate anybody or any group that's not Christian. It seems to me that would be something wrong with that. It still happens on a regular basis. kind of, hopefully, kind of raise your antenna and kind of get you, maybe you want to talk back to me a little bit. And of course, if I was at the church I go to, people would be saying, amen, or they would be looking at me strange like you looking at me right now. One of the two, I'm not sure. Maybe I'll stop there and maybe we can do this better now. You might want to raise some questions. I'm not sure. Anybody want to? Yes, ma'am.
I'm trying to understand whether these stories and the way that you understand them and interpret that the Bibles came from. A lot of the Bibles we have originally came with people who brought them here from Europe, right?
Yes,
And slavery was at about the same time as all these other prisoners and poor people being pushed out of Europe. They were all Christian. I don't know. My grandfather was an indentured person from Britain who got here early on. But then the other side of our family came and got land on my grandmother's side and were slave owners, which I'm aware of. And so I know there's two different huge threads. There's all these poor people that were just looking for a place to go. And some of them chose to come. They brought their own stories. Most of them, I think probably my grandfather both side was illiterate. But the other side is, when I've read, they were primitive Baptists. That's what it says in the things I've read from their diaries. And they had a school. So my question is, it's hard for me to comprehend that in Europe, did they actually bring this idea that the blacks were cursed with them, or did it really grow out of this economic dependency that the southern people, and some people, there were black folks in the north too, that how they can use that to reinforce this subjugation?
Well,
Because I'm just trying to figure out if it was just the way we interpreted it when we got here, because it made some people use it to justify separation and slavery and turning against.
well,
There are people that made industry grow and farms successful.
right. Certainly, the history of slavery in America, it began even before the British began to come. Europeans came here. There's a mindset amongst Anglo-Saxons, Protestants, and Puritans that thought themselves to be better even before they came to the United States. It wasn't, born in the United States. It was brought to the United States. And certainly, the idea that you could bring, you can invade a continent and bring people. Of course, I'm certain that Africans were in England. They were brought throughout the Caribbean and France. They were brought from all of these places, captured, and enslaved in all of these places before they came to the United States. And it just kind of carried over from there. The stories, scriptures are interpreted all the time. Everybody interprets the Bible. And amongst Christians, there's this thing called, a technical term called priesthood of all believers, which allow for, the Catholics don't do it as much, but Protestants do it as much as they want to do it. They consider it an open book that everybody can read and interpret, and they do. And the stories of travel, there are whole catechisms available in some of the libraries, rare books, and Howard University and other places, where enslaved people were actually trained to think of themselves as less than that. For instance, the question would be asked by a master, who do you think's better off? You think I'm better off as a master, you better off as a slave? And the slave might say, well, master, when I get up and chop wood to make a fire, walk across a cold floor and get to outside and make the fire. And I think that, think about you laying up in your nice warm bed. I think first I thought that you were better off, but then I know I'm better off because you have all those bills to think about. So when you have all those bills to think about and all those responsibilities, I must be better off because I don't have any responsibilities and all I have to do is what you tell me to do. There are lots of stories like that, of course, and they exist. I mean, not only do they exist, but they've been told, shared, and again, passed down. So it's not just the United States, in answer to your question, not just it just came to the United States and started this. This has been going on for long before folk came to the United States. I saw somebody else's name. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to know what was the cosmology or the spiritual positionality of African people before they came to.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for asking the question. Because the religion was varied. It's called, we talk about African traditional religion or otherwise indigenous religion. And this is something that scared Jesus out of the missionaries because they, of course, used drums, which would have been strange. They didn't understand what that was about for music. They were accused of being worshipers of the dead, which they were not worshipers of the dead, but they did certainly honor and reverence their ancestors. And that was a part of it. And as missionaries went into Africa, of course, they went seeing heathens or savages, and they needed to be redeemed. Well, I would like to just, present the idea that these Africans, they tended to live a long time before this thing called slavery. And the God who brought them even across the Atlantic Ocean safely and allowed them to come to the United States, there was a God. And they didn't believe in a lot of gods. They might believe in angels or like that, but they believed in a God, one God. And of course, about 15%, I think, of the Africans who came to America were actually Muslims. And so they came practicing that when they came to this nation. So again, here's a situation where they had faith, they believed something. Now, even as late as in the 1970s, I have a friend who came to the United States from Ghana. His name is Kwasi. But Kwasi was baptized in the United Methodist Church. And when he was baptized in the United Methodist Church, he could not be baptized under the name Kwasi. He had to have a Christian name. And so they gave him the name Frank. They named people David and Matthew and stuff like that. He had a good Christian name, Frank. So again, the Africans certainly practiced faith. It was as real to them as anybody else's faith is to them. Any of the rest of us, our faith is to us. And that's what I can say about that. You have a follow-up or you have a follow-up question? Or?
I was, and when Africans were enslaved, they could not read or write. That was the risk of death, right?
That's true.
But you gave them a Bible. Because, and why is that? Because what made reading and writing more a threat than being a Christian and Christian Bible? Because that's political.
Well, the Bible is also, there were stories in the Bible that
we couldn't read.
Liberated. we could not read.
African people can't read those stories.
Well,
they were told
some of them could read at a point. At a point, some could read. Some could read. They learned to read. This is what I'll tell you about that. The Bible was a book where oftentimes they were taught a couple of things. Two, slave, obey your master because this is right. And the other thing was is to honor those who are in charge, who have charge over you. The people who were won to Christianity typically were little children who were taught early on pretty much what the slave masters wanted to teach them. Now, historically, we have the same, that in most churches there's not a lot of men. I don't know what happened. It's not a lot of men in white church, black church. There's not a lot of men necessarily. In the black church early on, there were not a lot of men who practiced Christianity because they asked the question that you asked. How do you get God out of a book? Especially that part, we never hear this other part of the book, which is why reading and having the ability to write made Africans such a threat. I think it was Frederick Douglass who said that he didn't want to, I'm paraphrasing, that he was afraid about learning to read because everybody had to be African and learn how to read. The next thing was they started preaching. And so they had that. Yeah. All right. Somebody else have a question? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I have a question. Do you see new enlightened interpretations of the various stories that you showed earlier, or that you shared earlier, that may reinterpret those, lift the curses, if you will, and recognize equality among the people within Christianity? Or do we still see various denominations still teaching that derision, that
It still exists, and it will. And let me say this: it's kind of like the story of the lion and the lion hunter. The lion hunter always wins. Why? Lions do not write books. And what has happened oftentimes and frequently, and much too frequently, in the African American community, we don't have scholars who do enough, I should say, writing. And where there's enough writing, there's not enough reading. I would challenge that most of the African Americans, and this is, I wish there was more here, most African Americans and probably most whites are not familiar with the gentleman by the name of James Cone, a scholar out of Union Theological Seminary, came up in Arkansas, and he recognized that there was this void in scholarship amongst African Americans because he was left kind of empty in reading the stories and understanding what was going on. And he came up with a thing called black theology. And when some people hear that, they might get a little shaky like that. But it was an answer to the philosophy of black power. Again, something else might shake people up. Because they would say, well, black power means hate people, kill people, burn stuff up. But that's not what it means. Black power has the idea that when African American people join together, they have strength, they can vote, they can vote together in blocks, they can make things happen, they can build together. White power, on the other side, is a different thing. White power does have the tendency to say hate people, hurt people, stop people, do things to people that they shouldn't do. There is a difference, but many people don't recognize that. Let me push this a little further. There is a beginning in the understanding. Again, I hold to this idea that there is probably more injury amongst African Americans to other African Americans. Why? because of the literature they tend to use to inform their thinking. African American faith tends to mirror a lot of right-wing theology, where there's patriotism. Not patriotism. There is patriotism, of course, but there's that male dominance in the thinking, where the man is always right and the woman is always subjected and all that kind of thing. Where in an African American church, that's very true, of course, but the scriptures teach what? That we're made in God's image. And some people would argue that we're made in God's image is to be able to think and to reason and communicate. But what about people who are hindered from thinking? Or what about people who are hindered from communicating? Aren't they made in God's image too? Even in Genesis 1:27, I think it is, it says, in the image of God created he them, male and female. We're most familiar, scholars would say that there's more than one writer that's in the scripture in Genesis, and one tends to be a little kinder than the other one, because the one tells a story that everybody's familiar with. The woman comes from the rib of man and not from being equal. But I submit to you, if a person cannot hear a word that I'm speaking, that person is still made in the image of God. No matter what color they are, even though we can point out from the scriptures, and a lot of people skip over that even the Garden of Eden was partially, at least, in Africa. When we skip over that, we don't talk about that very much. But yeah, so there's the interpretation, I think, is coming, and I would also say that everybody doesn't hold to the idea. I certainly don't. I don't know a lot of people do, that Africans are cursed or were cursed, or that Cain was cursed, or the Canaanites were cursed by God.